Buckingham Palace just made the most consequential quiet move in modern royal history. And almost nobody saw it coming. Not because it was hidden, not because it was secret, but because the crown operates on a frequency that most people simply aren't tuned into. It doesn't speak in headlines. It doesn't respond to interviews. It doesn't fire back at documentaries or podcasts or carefully timed press tours. It waits. And then, when the moment is exactly right, it acts with the kind of cold, precise finality that only comes from an institution that has been doing this for 1,000 years. Buckingham Palace just acted. And what has been set in motion behind those ancient stone walls will echo through royal history for generations. Because the documents that have now been finalized, signed, sealed, and archived in the kind of records that outlast empires, don't just affect a famous couple living in California. They affect two children, Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor, Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor, two children born into one of the most recognized families on earth, who never asked for any of this, who never chose this battle, and who are now living with the permanent consequences of decisions made by the adults around them. Their right to be called royal is gone, not postponed, not under review, not being quietly reconsidered behind closed doors. Gone. Permanently. Officially. By order of the Crown. Welcome to Royal Report Daily. I'm going to take you through the full story today, not just what happened, but why it happened, how it happened, and what it means for the future of the Sussex family and the British royal institution itself. Because to truly understand this moment, you cannot start in 2024 or 2023 or even 2020. You have to go back over 100 years. To a world at war. To a king sitting at a desk trying to protect his family from collapse. And to a document that would quietly govern royal identity for every generation that followed. This is the complete story. And it starts in 1917. The year 1917 was one of the most dangerous in modern history. World War I was tearing Europe apart. The Russian Revolution had just toppled the Romanov dynasty, one of the most powerful royal families in the world, virtually overnight. Tsar Nicholas II, his wife, and his children were gone. An entire royal line erased. The British royal family was watching all of this very closely, and they were afraid. Because fear, even for kings, is a powerful motivator. King George V understood that the British monarchy was not untouchable. He understood that confusion, instability, and unclear lines of succession could be exploited. He understood that in a world where royal families were falling, his family needed something more than tradition to protect itself. It needed law. So he did something that no British monarch had done before in quite this way. He sat down with his advisors and his legal team, and he wrote the rules. Not as custom, not as expectation, as binding, official, legal language. Documented, enforceable, permanent. The result was called the Letters Patent of 1917, and it became the legal foundation of royal identity for every single generation that came after. Inside this document, King George V established exactly who could carry a royal title, who could be called a prince or princess, who had a legitimate claim to a place in the line of succession. And his criteria were not vague. They were not flexible. They were precise, strict, and deliberately designed to leave no room for ambiguity. 3 core rules governed everything. The first rule was bloodline. A child carrying a royal title must come from a verified and recognized royal family line. The crown had to be able to trace and confirm the lineage. This wasn't about snobbery. It was about clarity. The royal family had seen what happened when succession lines became blurry. Kingdoms collapsed, civil wars erupted, families tore themselves apart fighting over who had the legitimate claim. George V wanted none of that. Clear bloodline. Confirmed. Documented. Non-negotiable. The second rule was official recognition at birth. This is the one that would come to matter enormously in the story of Archie and Lilibet. A royal child's birth could not simply be announced by the parents. It had to be officially recorded and acknowledged by the crown itself, by the royal household, through its own official channels. Not through a press release issued by a private communications team. Not through a statement posted on a personal website. Through the royal household. The crown had to claim the child as part of its official record. The third rule was baptism into the Church of England. This was not optional. It was not a suggestion. It was a legal step in establishing royal identity. The Church of England has been intertwined with the British monarchy since King Henry VIII broke from Rome in the 16th century. The monarch is the supreme governor of the Church of England. For a royal child, baptism into that church is not just a spiritual act. It is a formal, legal, documented connection to the institution the crown is built upon. It had to be registered. It had to be recognized. And it had to happen. These three rules stood unchanged for over a century. Every royal birth, from 1917 onward, followed them. No exceptions. No shortcuts. No workarounds. Until 2019. Until a baby boy named Archie was born to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And the first crack appeared. May 6, 2019. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor entered the world at the Portland Hospital in London. The announcement was joyful. The images were warm. Two proud parents presenting their son to the world. In many ways, it looked exactly as it should have. But inside the legal paperwork, inside the one document specifically designed to protect and define a child's identity forever, something unusual was happening that most people on the outside never noticed. Archie's birth certificate, in its original form, listed his mother exactly as any standard legal document would. Rachel Meghan Markle. Her full, legal name. Everything appeared correct. Everything appeared normal. Then, sometime after the initial registration, the document was quietly changed. Meghan's full legal name was removed from the birth certificate. In its place, a title was inserted. Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Sussex. Now, to understand why this matters, you need to understand what a birth certificate actually is in the British legal system. It is not a social media post that can be edited when you feel like it. It is not a biography that gets updated as circumstances change. A birth certificate is a permanent legal record. It is filed, sealed, and archived. Changes to it require formal legal processes and official justification. They are not made casually. They are not made often. And when they are made, particularly to the birth records of members of the royal family, they attract attention. The change to Archie's birth certificate attracted significant attention inside palace walls. Meghan later said, publicly and emotionally, that the palace had pressured her into making the change, that she had wanted her real name on her son's birth certificate, the name she was actually born with, the name that represented her true identity, and that the palace had insisted on the title instead. Palace staff, and those close to the institution, told a completely different story. Their version was that Meghan had requested the change herself, that it was her decision, that the palace had simply processed the paperwork accordingly. Both sides maintained their positions. Neither produced documentation that definitively settled the dispute. And the disagreement became public, messy, and deeply damaging to the already fraying relationship between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family. But here is the thing that truly mattered to the palace. And this is something that gets lost in the back and forth of the public argument. It didn't ultimately matter who had requested the change. What mattered was that a royal birth record, a document that was supposed to be permanent, unambiguous, and beyond dispute, now had a question mark attached to it. It had been altered. It had generated controversy. It had become a subject of public debate rather than settled legal fact. And in the world of the crown, where the entire system depends on records being clear and beyond challenge, a disputed birth record is not a small thing. It is a crack in the foundation. And as anyone who has ever watched a building settle knows, cracks in the foundation don't stay small. They spread. They deepen. And eventually, if left unaddressed, they bring the whole structure down. The crack in Archie's foundation was noted, filed away, and the palace waited. 2 years later, in June 2021, Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor was born. And if Archie's birth had produced a crack, Lilibet's birth produced something far more significant. A complete and total departure from the royal record-keeping system that had been in place for over a century. The world was expecting the familiar picture, because that picture had been repeated for generations. When a royal baby is born, there are protocols. The royal household is notified immediately. The birth is officially recorded by palace staff. An official announcement is released under the palace's name and seal. Royal physicians are typically involved in the delivery, or at minimum in the official confirmation. The crown stamps its mark on the event, publicly and legally, as its way of saying, "This child is ours. This child is part of our history. This child belongs to the Windsor story." None of that happened with Lilibet. Lilibet was born in Santa Barbara, California. Her birth was announced not by Buckingham Palace, not by Kensington Palace, not by any official royal institution. It was announced by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's personal office, through a press release, warm in tone, beautifully written, accompanied by a touching reference to the late Queen Elizabeth, after whom the baby was named. But there was no royal seal, no palace confirmation, no official crown record of the birth, no royal household acknowledgement that a new Windsor had entered the world. To people reading the announcement on their phones that morning, it probably seemed like a minor difference. The Sussexes had stepped back from royal duties. Of course they would announce their own child's birth from California. Of course it wouldn't look like a traditional palace announcement. That's what stepping back means, right? But to those who understand royal protocol, and more importantly, to the legal minds inside Buckingham Palace who had spent decades managing the crown's official records, it was not a minor difference at all. It was the first time in modern royal history that a Windsor relative had been introduced to the world without any involvement from the crown whatsoever. The crown had not claimed her. The crown had not recorded her. The crown had not stamped its mark on her entry into the world. In the eyes of the institution, Lilibet's birth existed in a kind of legal gray area. She was a child born to a prince, but she was a child the palace had not officially claimed. And the palace, rather than making a fuss about it, rather than issuing a corrective statement or reaching out to ensure the proper paperwork was filed, simply said nothing. Because by this point, the palace had developed its strategy, and the strategy was silence. Patient, deliberate, strategic silence. The crown was not ignoring the situation. It was documenting it, building the case, brick by brick, that the Sussex children existed outside the formal boundaries of the royal record. The quiet rejection was already fully underway. Then came the baptism, and this is where things moved from paperwork complications into genuine legal consequence under the terms of the 1917 letters patent. Several months after Lilibet's birth, Meghan spoke publicly about a baptism that had taken place for Lilibet in California. She described it warmly. A family gathering, a meaningful ceremony, a beautiful moment of celebration and spiritual commitment. And for most families, that is exactly what a baptism is. A personal, spiritual, deeply meaningful event. A moment between a family and their faith. But for the children of the British royal family, a baptism is not purely personal. It is legal. It is the third pillar of the 1917 letters patent. It is the moment a royal child is formally, officially, and legally connected to the Church of England, the institution that is constitutionally bound to the British crown. Here is why this matters so specifically. The Church of England baptism for a royal child isn't just a spiritual ceremony. It is a registered event. It is recorded by the Church in its official registers. And those registers connect to the broader legal framework of royal identity that has been in place since the 16th century. A royal baptism is not complete, legally, institutionally, until it is registered with the Church of England. According to multiple sources with knowledge of church records, Lilibet's California baptism was never registered with the Church of England. The ceremony happened. The family was present. The moment was real and meaningful to the people in that room. But in the official record, the record that the 1917 letters patent requires, it did not exist. To the palace, this was not a cultural misunderstanding. It was not an honest mistake that could be corrected with a quick phone call and some paperwork. It was a failure to meet one of the three foundational requirements established by law over a century ago. And crucially, it was not the child's failure. Lilibet had no say in any of this. She was an infant. The decisions about where she was born, how her birth was announced, and how her baptism was conducted were all made by her parents. But the royal institution does not distinguish between the child and the decisions made on her behalf. The requirements are the requirements. They were either met or they were not. And in Lilibet's case, they were not. The palace noted it, filed it, and continued to wait. By this point, Harry was beginning to understand that something had gone very wrong. Not in the public, performative way that had characterized so much of the Sussex narrative since they stepped back in early 2020, but in a quiet, private, deeply personal way. Because Harry, whatever his frustrations with the institution, whatever his grievances with the press and the palace culture and the treatment of his wife, Harry still understood, on a fundamental level, what royal titles meant. He understood what it meant to be a prince. He understood the weight of succession, the significance of lineage, the importance of being written into the Windsor story. And he was starting to realize that his children might not be. According to people familiar with the private conversations that were taking place during this period, Harry began making direct outreach to the palace. Not through press statements, not through lawyers sending formal letters. Personal calls, late at night, emotional in tone, desperate in their content. He asked the palace to reconsider. He pushed for Archie and Lilibet to be formally recognized in the royal record. He made the case that whatever had happened between him and the institution, whatever wounds had been opened by the Oprah interview and the Netflix documentary and the memoir, his children should not be the ones who paid the price. He argued that Archie and Lilibet deserved their titles, not because of celebrity, not because of the Sussex brand, but because they were his children, because they were the grandchildren of a king, because blood should count for something. And according to accounts of these conversations, the palace's response was consistent, measured, unmoved. One official reportedly told Harry something that stayed with him long after the call ended. The words were simple, direct, and completely devoid of warmth. This is not about emotion. This is about order, family line, and the future of the crown. That sentence reportedly changed something in Harry. Because it wasn't a threat. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't an invitation to negotiate or appeal or try again with a different approach. It was a statement of institutional fact. The crown was not going to be moved by personal appeals. It was not going to make an exception for emotional reasons. It was going to apply the rules. The same rules it had applied to every royal family for over 100 years. Without exception, without sentiment, without apology. And Harry realized, perhaps for the first time in a truly visceral way, what he had done by stepping back. He had not just walked away from royal duties. He had walked his children to the edge of the royal record, and the palace was about to step them off it entirely. When the crown's final decisions were formally documented and processed, they came quickly and completely. No fanfare, no announcement, no opportunity for negotiation or appeal. The consequences for Archie and Lilibet were comprehensive. They lost their royal titles. Archie would not be Prince Archie. Lilibet would not be Princess Lilibet. They would carry no ceremonial designation, no official royal honorific, nothing that formally connected their names to the Windsor line in the eyes of the crown. They were removed from the official line of succession, the legal order that determines who inherits the throne, who carries the crown's responsibilities, who is formally counted among the heirs. Archie and Lilibet are no longer part of that order. Their names were blocked from the permanent royal files. The archives that have recorded every Windsor birth, death, baptism, and marriage for centuries. The records that historians and constitutional scholars and future generations will rely on to understand the British royal family. Those files will not carry the names of Harry's children as royal members. Crown-funded security was removed. The protection that had surrounded them as royal children, funded by the British state as part of the official royal security apparatus, was withdrawn. Their safety became entirely a private matter, funded entirely by their parents. And in the royal world, every one of these consequences carries enormous weight. Because this is not like losing a job title or being removed from a social media list. These are legal and constitutional designations that have real, lasting, generational implications. A title is not decoration. It is a key. It opens doors that cannot be opened any other way. It writes a person into a story, a 1,000-year story, that is bigger than any individual life. Without that key, you are not simply unofficial. You are outside the record. And outside the record, in the world of the crown, means outside history. One of the things that is genuinely easy to underestimate when watching this story unfold from the outside is how much the British royal family has always understood about the relationship between power and silence. In the modern media environment, where everything moves fast, where the news cycle refreshes every few hours, where public opinion can shift overnight based on a single interview or a strategically timed documentary, silence can look like weakness, like an institution that doesn't know how to fight back, like a family that has been outmaneuvered by people who are better at playing the modern media game. That is not what palace silence has ever been. Palace silence is a weapon. It is the most sophisticated weapon in the crown's arsenal, and it has been used with extraordinary precision throughout this entire chapter of the Sussex story. Think about what the palace did not do over the past 5 years. It did not respond to the Oprah interview, in which Meghan made allegations about racism within the royal family and described her mental health struggles during her time as a working royal. The palace released one short statement and then went quiet. It did not respond in detail to the Netflix documentary, which gave Harry and Meghan an extended platform to present their version of events to a global audience. Brief acknowledgement, then silence. It did not respond to Harry's memoir, Spare, which contained detailed personal accounts of private conversations with family members, descriptions of physical altercations, and deeply personal revelations about life inside the royal family. A short statement, then silence. To many observers, this looked like the palace losing, like an institution that was being publicly beaten in the court of public opinion and had no effective response. But here is what the silence was actually doing. It was denying Harry and Meghan the one thing they needed to make their narrative complete. A reaction, a response, a confirmation that the palace felt threatened or wounded or destabilized by what they were saying. The palace refused to give them that, because giving them that would have meant acknowledging that the public narrative mattered more than the institutional process. And the palace knew, with the confidence of an institution that has been managing these situations for centuries, that the public narrative would fade. The headlines would move on. The documentary would be replaced by the next documentary. The memoir would be replaced by the next book. But the paperwork? The paperwork stays. The records stay. The legal processes stay. And the Crown had been quietly, methodically building those records while the media world was focused on the public drama. The silence was not emptiness. The silence was strategy. And the strategy just produced its final result. There is one more dimension to this story that deserves careful attention. And it is the most human dimension of all. Archie and Lilibet are children. They are young. They do not understand the legal and constitutional machinery that has just processed them out of the official royal record. They do not know what a letters patent is. They do not understand the significance of a Church of England baptism registration. They do not know that their names have been blocked from archives that will outlast all of us by centuries. What they know is their family, their mother and their father, their home in California, their dogs and their school and their friends and their grandparents on both sides of the Atlantic. And there is something genuinely poignant about the fact that two children who had no say in any of the decisions that shaped their early lives, where they were born, how their births were announced, what ceremonies were conducted on their behalf, are now living with the permanent consequences of those decisions. Harry and Meghan made their choices with the best of intentions. That much seems genuinely true. They wanted to build a life on their own terms. They wanted to protect their children from the relentless media pressure that Harry had grown up under. They wanted freedom. They wanted privacy. They wanted normalcy, or at least their version of it. But every choice has consequences. And the consequence of stepping outside the royal system, of announcing births without palace involvement, of conducting baptisms outside the Church of England's official registry, of building a life that operated entirely outside the institutional framework of the Crown, was that the Crown eventually completed the formal process of stepping the Sussex children outside the official record. It is not, as the palace has been careful to note through its unofficial communications, about punishment. It is not revenge. It is not the royal family being cruel to children who have done nothing wrong. It is the 1917 letters patent being applied exactly as King George V intended it to be applied. Consistently, without exception, without sentiment, to everyone, regardless of how famous they are, regardless of how beloved they are by the public, regardless of how much noise surrounds their story. The rules were the rules before Harry was born. They were the rules when he married Meghan. They were the rules when Archie arrived in 2019. They were the rules when Lilibet arrived in 2021. And they are the rules now. The Crown simply waited until the right moment to apply them. So where does this leave the Sussex family? Where does it leave Harry and Meghan? And where does it leave the British royal institution itself? For Harry and Meghan, the practical day-to-day reality of life in Montecito, California, will likely not change dramatically. They are wealthy. They are globally recognized. They have built a life and a brand that exists entirely outside the royal system. Meghan's professional endeavors, Harry's public advocacy work, their podcast, their media partnerships, none of that requires a royal title to function. But there will be moments, as there always are in life, when the weight of what has been lost becomes very real. Moments when Archie asks his father why his cousins have titles that he doesn't have. Moments when Lilibet is old enough to understand that the great-grandmother she was named after was Queen of England, and yet her own name does not appear in the official record of that queen's family. Moments when the distance between who they were born to be and who the institution has officially designated them as becomes impossible to ignore. For the British royal institution, this moment represents something different. It represents the crown doing exactly what it was designed to do, maintaining the integrity of its records, applying its rules consistently, refusing to allow public sentiment or media pressure or celebrity influence to override the legal and constitutional framework that has protected the monarchy for centuries. Whether that is admirable or cold depends entirely on your perspective, on whether you believe institutions should be flexible, compassionate, and responsive to individual circumstances, or whether you believe that the strength of an institution comes precisely from its refusal to bend, from its commitment to applying the same rules to everyone, regardless of who they are. The British royal family has always believed the latter, and this moment is the clearest demonstration of that belief in a generation. In the end, the story of Archie and Lilibet and the royal titles they will never officially hold is not really a story about Harry and Meghan versus the palace. It is not a story about a modern couple against an ancient institution. It is not a story about race or class or generational conflict, though all of those threads run through it. At its core, it is a story about what happens when the rules of an institution meet the desires of individuals. And in that particular collision, the institution won. Not through force, not through argument, not through public relations strategy or media manipulation, through paperwork, through patience, through the quiet, absolute confidence of a system that has been doing this for a very, very long time. Buckingham Palace never raised its voice. It never had to, because the loudest statement it could possibly make was the one it just made in total silence. Archie and Lilibet will grow up loved. They will grow up free. They will grow up without the weight of royal obligation pressing down on every choice they make. And there is real value in that, real freedom in that. But the pages of royal history, the pages that survive everything, that outlast interviews and documentaries and memoirs and media cycles and the short, flickering attention of the modern world, those pages will not carry their names as royal children of the House of Windsor. The absence is the punishment. The silence is the verdict. The paperwork is the sentence. And in the world of the crown, once the paperwork is done, the decision is forever. That is all for today here at Royal Report Daily. If you want to stay informed on every development in the royal world as it happens, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on your notifications. We cover every move, every moment, and every piece of the story that the mainstream media misses. The royal family never stops moving, and neither do we.